let's talk about it.
Hello and welcome back to Thicc Radio, the podcast where we talk about gaming, fetism, and everything in their orbit. I'm James.
And I'm Tim, so let's get into it. Today we're welcoming to the show our friend Sam.
Hello,
Hi, how are you?
I'm lovely. And you?
Good, doll. We're so happy to have you here. We were really looking forward to this because, dear listeners, Sam, we've been chatting a little bit recently. We chatted films. I think we were in the middle of complaining about the fact that almost exclusively these review episodes are just me and Tim like dealing with emotional self-harm as we watch terrible things dealing with gaining, and it's just us suffering.
Yeah, it hasn't been a fun experience.
No. But we do this so that you, the listener, don't have to. But in the midst of this, Sam, you had recommended that there was a new movie that we should check out called Big Boys. And, I just thought, since having watched it, you would be the perfect person, therefore, to bring on and have a conversation about this film. So listen, Doll, are you ready to get into it today?
I sure am.
Oh, wonderful. Now, before we properly kick off, can I just ask, because I just, talked about this little series of review apps, have you listened to any of our other review apps by any chance?
I have.
What ones have you listened to?
The Whale.
Oh.
Yeah, that was a pretty contentious episode.
I think your response to this film will be a lot better than your response to The Whale.
Yes.
Much more so. Much more so. And I want to be clear about this as well, because obviously part of this is we've insisted that a lot of these reviews specifically talk about gaining tropes and elements. Otherwise, if we were reviewing every fucking film and TV show that was about fat, we'd be here forever. We're not going to be doing that. However, there is a rhyme and a reason for this. The Whale had all this press behind it. It demanded discussion. And with Big Boys, having done a little bit of research into the waves it's making on local film circuits and just what this proposes in its content, is a breath of absolute fresh air. So this is really what we're going to be getting into today, y'all. Now, Sam, for the listeners who maybe haven't heard about this film, don't know what it's about, can you give us a quick synopsis? What is this film? What's the story?
So, 14-year-old Jamie going on a camping trip with his cousin and his brother, and there's an unexpected guest accompanying them that might shake up Jamie's life.
Love that. Short, sweet, to the point. It is a film that takes place over the course of a weekend where this adorable teenager we see very quickly is coming to terms with his sexuality. And there is a person being invited on this camping trip who aligns with said sexuality in terms of his focus. Let's be clear on that. And listen, we're going to go through the film bit by bit, but I just want to say here, that film had me bitched out because I suffered so much, not even secondhand embarrassment, but just I am 30, 31, 32, I am early 30s, people. This projected 14-year-old was saying and doing things that I was transported back into the most awkward time of my life, and that was hard.
He was saying things that remind me of me now.
Tim, what about you? Did you feel any sense of relation to those narratives?
Yeah, it didn't really remind me so much of anything I do now, but it definitely put me right back into that headspace of being a 14-year-old in the closet, awkward teenager dealing with having crushes and not being able to tell them about it, or just how to respond to things that other people are doing, because I felt on the outside, I felt different, and there were a lot of moments in this film that was like, ooh, I remember that.
Yeah, definitely challenging in places. So we're going to name off some people here just so we get a capture of the film. So Big Boys, it's directed by Corey Sherman, who is himself a part of the gay bear community, apparently very active in the LA area. So we aren't talking, to be clear, from the jump about someone who's being voyeuristic about the queer experience or the fat experience. We're talking about someone who is actively engaged in this and understands intimately these experiences being shown on screen. So first of all, we've got that. Uh, the main character, Jamie, is played by Isaac Krasner, who himself is a 16-year-old plus size kid, and we're going to be coming back to him quite a bit in this film because when I tell you this kid, it was real. It was so. I complain constantly, like red, white, royal blue, Heartstopper. Like, I don't relate to these queer experiences because they are so positive in such like a everyone kumbaya kind of way, and that is just not the queer experience for the majority of people. This was laced with awkwardness and uncertainty and in some aspects fearing for one's safety that I just think is so close to the punch that it was wonderful.
You know what I appreciated about this was you had just mentioned things like Heartstopper, Red, White, and Royal Blue. There's a lot of queer media that's come out in the last couple of years that where it is kind of like fairy tale-ish and everything works out. I think Love, Simon was another one, which is way over here in sort of like La La Land, fairy tales, everything comes true. And then like the stuff that I grew up with, which was Queer as Folk, which was a bit more dour and depressing and realistic and gritty and like, hey, life doesn't always work out the way you want it to. And I feel like this movie kind of straddles the line in between those two extremes. So
Definitely. And I would also say, because this character is 14, we are so accustomed to, because it is queer, we are talking about sexuality, we are so accustomed to barely consenting 18-year-old getting dick down railed, having his bussy blown open, and just the narratives around sex are around how you as an adult process sex and sexuality. This is probably one of the first things that I've seen where I truly felt like when I was a teenager and processing sexuality and had no fucking clue how shit worked, that this was the kind of like head frame mindset that was in. So again, it feels very like honest to the teen experience.
this is a much better signpost than what I had to deal with because the media that I was watching was basically, 17-year-old ends up sleeping with a 25-year-old, and it was, no one raised an eyebrow at it. And like, that's what I was set up to expect.
And also, if we can say, for yourself, Tim, like you would have been in the kind of age bracket of people on the tail end of HIV/AIDS epidemic, which, let's be clear,
Yeah, I mean, it was still, we were still talking about it, but it was not exactly, it wasn't,
it
how
wasn't
can
in
I, how
full
can I,
swing, shall we
it
say.
wasn't in full swing. And there were some people my age who were not as concerned about it as they should have been.
Hmm. But it is also indicative of times that have changed. So many queer narratives, and we talk about this, like, oh, why is the only gay stories we tell, like, it's either homosexual is dealing with a triad relationship where everyone's a whore and there's crazy drug usage, or it's HIV/AIDS, like fucking trauma porn, you know?
Or they're all white twinks.
Or they're all white twinks, all expressing and struggling and doing all this. So even from the jump, this film expresses so much difference. I mean, the guy that plays Dan, if we can just talk about him for a brief second here, David Johnson III, beautiful black man. So even in this, like it's breaking down the initial casting expectations of race matching and age matching and all these other bits and pieces, right? So, first thing off the rank, as I mentioned, Isaac Krasner, who plays Jamie, the main character, is himself a fat teenager. No fat suit, legit, all that. How does that sit with you all to see legitimate fat representation on screen? Before anything else, just an actual fatty.
It's like seeing myself on screen. I
Let's
was a fat kid. I have always been a big kid my whole life. And I think I don't know if I was quite as big as he is, but we were probably around the same weight growing up.
Now, I didn't grow up chubby. Like I was a skinny kid, I was a skinny teenager, but I appreciate the fact that for the purposes of this is a story about his insecurities in his weight. Like I'm glad that it was an actual plus size actor instead of just a fat suit or someone who is Because you know what Hollywood considers fat. You know, like maybe they're 10 pounds overweight. Hollywood considers them fat and will cast them in fat roles. And, you know, it was nice to see that somebody who actually fit the bill was playing the part.
And I want to quickly ask here for the pair of you, like I mentioned before about how, the guy that plays Dan is a beautiful man of color. Like I noticed that straight off the rank that there was a breaking down of those expectations simply by having a man of color play what would have been the projected opposite. Did you guys get a sense of that at all, or did it not even like register as like a point of interest?
I just think it's sweet.
I didn't have any particular strong opinions about the fact that he was a actor of color, but I just thought that he was gorgeous, and it was nice to see that the object of his affection was a person of color instead of like another white Twinkie boy or some blonde Adonis, you know, in their 20s or whatever. Like this would, and the fact that the actor is what was it, David Johnson, he is not. He's not like chubby, but like he's very thick.
Very much a typical bear aesthetic. And I think we're definitely going to talk about this throughout the film, but at no stage in this narrative between Jamie and Dan is there thinness. It simply is not there. Jamie is a fat kid. Dan, who I'm gonna guess is like a character aged like maybe early to mid 20s would be my projection. I would certainly not say he was thick either in like this fat sense, but he was most definitely a bear. And y'all, if you look up this man, if you watch this film, this is the kind of man you are gawking at the club. This is the kind of man that you want in your bed. You will not turn him away. He's so beautiful. So beautiful.
I could be wrong, but I'm not sure if the actor who plays Dan has been in anything else.
I tried to do a little research. I couldn't find much else. I found like typical headshots or, body pics, but you clothed, that like actors do when they're trying to put themselves out there. Like it was great to just see this constant theme of thickness. Like thinness was never brought into Jamie's sexuality because in the very first scene, actually, he's like doing stuff in his bedroom. He has well, we don't know if they're a gay couple, but there are two very clearly bearish men, and one of them is somewhat fat, and they're just like setting up a barbecue in their yard, right? And there's like a brief moment of like, Jimmy's like, hey, like waves, and the other guy waves back, and they just go about their evening. But like, there is no moment in which Jamie is like, ooh, I want to be thin, or I'm pursuing thinness. It's always thickalicious and beautiful, and I love seeing that because I feel like so often fatness in discussion is only ever understood when in relation to thinness or a pursuit of thinness. And in this instance, there was none of that. It was thick and juicy from start to finish, which very,
Or
very
it's being fetishized. Like that's the other way it'll happen is it's being fetishized. What I really appreciated about the scene was he was looking longingly out the window at a life that he wishes he could have. And totally relatable. I mean, how many of us have done that? And you know, as a in the closet teen back in the day, you know, it's not that I had a ton of like gay couples to look at and say, oh, you know, someday that'll be me. But just being able to look out at a happy couple and those feelings of isolation, it's like, oh, am I ever going to have that? Am I ever going to fall in love? Am I ever going to find the right one for me? You know,
we've also talked about this, like why it's so important to have visibility because we need to give our queer kids a vision of the future. You can have this and you can do whatever you want to do. So it's beautiful that the movie really shows the example of that. And when I think to, again, just the authenticity of the film, like throughout it, there was constant awkward dialogue. I mean, when Jamie is like trying to act cool in front of Dan, and he is just saying the stupidest and weirdest shit, and I'm like, ah, fuck, that is me. That is me today, quite frankly. Like, saying absolutely stupid shit because I'm like, I think I'm funny and I wanted to be impressive. Oh god, I've ruined everything. Everything is terrible now. Um, even like, he's shy in a lot of moments and doesn't necessarily open up and talk too much. Um, and in fact, just quickly, I know this is jumping ahead in the film, but like there's a scene because like it's a cousin's trip, and Dan is there because he is dating his cousin Allie, and there is a moment where they are very clearly having sex in the tent, and Jamie walks over, and all he did was like, hey, Dan, I just wanted to say thanks for cooking with me earlier. And he's like, yeah, no worries, bud. And it's just waiting for Jamie to move on, and Jamie just keeps fucking talking. Like it's just, it's too real. It's too real. My God. So I like that we talked before as well about how there were the Bear Neighbors, but there were other moments throughout the film as well. So like when they first get to the campsite, you see these kind of, disheveled looking dads setting up tents and passed out in the chair drinking beer. And then later in the film, there's a scene where Jamie's walking along, he's got a picture in his hand, and there's this like troop of youths, male youths, like walking past. And in each of these instances, right, like Jamie's not making any kind of direct eye contact. He's very much just observing these men, these male figures. And when they look at him, he shies away. He looks away. He does not want to be seen looking. And I do feel that that is very common of the queer male experience, especially when you are curious about men. And so you want to look and you want to understand why you're looking, but you can't be seen looking. Was that something that either of you all experienced growing up?
Yeah, junior high school locker room PE, having to shower in front of a bunch of other guys and not look. Yeah, not an easy thing to do.
Absolutely. In the locker room, high school, uh, come on. There was some stuff going on in there.
And there were some chunky guys in my classes over the years that I had to take, Jim, and it's like, of course I wanted to look because there weren't that many of them. I'm kind of from a time period where obesity in childhood was a little bit more rare than it is today. So there was like maybe one or two in my various classes over the years, and it's like, how do I look at the boy that I'm crushing on? How do I look at his belly without him noticing that I'm looking at his belly?
That's a unique experience for me. I was probably the biggest in my gym class. So all the boys I was looking at were slimmer than me.
Mm.
Well, here's a question for you because, again, this is something we like to talk about the difference between when you were skinny and then you become a gainer and when you were fat as a kid and you grow up to become a gainer. Like for you, when you were looking at guys your own age, when you were a teenager, did you find like, yeah, because you were the biggest, they were by logic smaller, but did you find that at that time you were like interested in the thinness because it was different to you, or do you find that like you were still looking at the objectionably fatter ones as the sort of object of your interest at the time?
At the time, I think I was looking at the hunkier men because I don't know, that's who everyone else seemed to be looking at.
That makes sense. And it's also a commentary as well on how society informs our obsession with beauty and our perception of what is and is not beautiful. Like, when you're a young queer teenager, of course, then you're going to be looking at certain categories of people versus what we then have to kind of work through to decide is correct for us.
The people I remember looking at the most were actually the varsity football team who would come in every Friday or Thursday in their uniforms and they'd all sit at the same table together, lined up. And I just sit and watch.
Boy watching. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's the why are you looking at them? I just think they're really cool, and I'm just admiring them, and I'm wondering how I can become one of them. All those like moments where you get caught out by people, and it's like, I'm not gay, I'm just looking for some reason that I'm trying to think of right here on the spot.
You know what really sucks is when you get called out by the very person that you're looking at. I had that happen to me a couple of times.
Oh no. Well, now you have to tell us what happened. Come on.
Well, no, it was just one of those moments in a locker room, where I'm changing back because I always had gym early in the morning for some reason. So, changing back into my regular school clothes, I must have been trying to steal glances at somebody, and I was called out by that because quit looking at me. And of course, the whole locker room heard that. I mean, it's like when you're, I don't think that this is true of every single person who is queer, but for a lot of us, everybody knows before we do. So it's when you get called out like that you kind of go into those moments of that gay panic where you're like, oh shit, was I really looking for that reason or was I just curious?
I mean, and it stands out and it's so obvious to people, because it exists in opposition to heterosexuality. You're not doing the thing that everyone else is doing. Of course, people notice. And it's so weird how we even build that up to be like, oh, well, people notice because you're really effeminate, and that's a really bad thing because it means that you deserve to be bullied and harassed. Like, it's so weird how these little incidental things just become these huge narratives of judgment that inform, ideas on femininity and masculinity in queer culture, which many of us contend with. Like, I will still, if I'm on apps, I have in recent years still gotten messages of like, are you masc or femme? And immediately I'm switched off because I'm like, I don't even think in those terms anymore. But the fact that you have to ask guarantees, baby, I'm not going to be masculine enough for you. I've
Was
got,
it somebody my age?
yes,
Yeah, that figures. I'm not surprised by that.
but like, I'm not trying to be facetious about this, but like, I grow like a good beard. Like, I'm bald on top because clearly high testosterone and genetic levels. Like, if you want to talk about tropes that like define traditional masculinity, like, I have those. But also, like, what is enough? Like, what is this performance of masculinity that people require when it comes to sex? Why do you need someone who ticks all those boxes? What is it about that you require for you to maintain an erection and to achieve climax?
I wonder what someone like that would think of like, say, like the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that
Oh,
organization, but
yeah,
they're okay.
Queen ones. Absolutely.
Yeah. So like, but a lot of those, the men that are a part of that organization, like when they do the full face of makeup, they still, a lot of them still have facial hair. A lot of them, like, they don't trim their beards, or like they might glitter them, but they still are very presenting their facial hair, and they don't put on padding. They don't put on fake boobs or fake hips or anything like that. A lot of time it's just that nun's costume. So like right there.
There's a point I think that's worth bringing up because, you see it also happen throughout the film, tones of masculinity. Like, Jamie will struggle to connect. Like, there's a moment when they're on the way to the campsite where his older brother Will and Dan are talking about basketball. And Jamie's just sort of sat there awkwardly, like, I'm not interested in this, I don't want to talk about this, like, doesn't know how to engage, or at least doesn't want to. And then there's a scene later on where those two are arm wrestling each other and being like, whoa, bro, arm wrestling, you're so strong. And then Jamie has to take part in that. And even later on, after that point, well, sorry, actually, no, this would have happened beforehand. Yeah, no, it happened before this. Like, Will is encouraging Jamie to sneak out with him and steal a flask of booze to go and hit on other teen girls with him. Like, did either of you experience older male members of your family trying to, like, kind of break you into your masculinity, trying to like coax you out of what they perceive to be this awkward?
Your shell. Oh, we got to get him out of his shell. We got to get him to interact. We got to get him to be involved. And how do we do that? Oh, let's get him drunk. Yeah, sounds like a great idea.
Let me just say, I also dissociate when people talk about sports. I think that conversation circles back to the football team because, I mean, the men around me growing up were constantly telling me, I mean, look at me, go out for the football team. I'm like, I'm not interested in that.
Right. It's this trope of like you are by nature a broader shouldered, thicker guy. And it's so interesting to me that there is this push to be like, well, physically you're built for this, therefore you should do this. They don't do that to skinny kids. They didn't do that to me. They weren't like, oh, you should join the soccer team, oh, you should try out gymnastics. They only went for the big kids, and it didn't matter like how fucking like toned or blubbery they looked. It was always like rugby, football, got to do
It's
it.
it's like I was wasting my potential by doing the spelling bee instead.
Right. As if like your worth as a male type is only considered in relation to physical prowess. Like you have a purpose to serve in the world. It's to fuck a girl and get her pregnant and have a shitload of kids. It's to be tall and beefy and imposing and masculine and angry and dangerous. And if you're not doing that, then you're a fail. Like it is, again, these tropes that oh, why do we have generations of people that like talk about toxic masculinity these days and like people who come out of like trauma from these fucking situations? I don't know. Maybe because we're fucking abusing them and telling them that they ain't shit unless they fit into this extremely narrow idea of what it is to be a man.
Which is why I think it's great that Jamie's mother seemingly encourages his differentness,
Yes.
like letting him cook for himself, presumably buying all his fancy spices for him.
No.
She reminded me of my mother.
I don't know if she knew, but I think a lot of people say mothers know. And I think my mother knew. But I mean,
My mother claimed to not have known when I came out to her. She said that it was a shock to her. And when I think back on it, I'm like, really? You were shocked? As an adult, I've been able to have conversations with her about my younger years, and I'm like, Mom, I don't know how many little boys ask for a pair of ruby slippers. I don't know how many little boys ask for an easy bake oven. Like,
You know, at the time, my mom says that she didn't know, but now, if you'd ask her, she would say she knew.
it's interesting how that works. It's like, no, no, mother's intuition. Oh no, I always shut the fuck up, Linda. Shut.
whereas when I came out to my aunts, they were like, "Oh, honey, we've known since you were 5." You know, they were totally nonplussed. They were like, "We were just waiting for you to say something."
But it's also interesting, like when you're a kid, when you're a teen, like you have this thought in your head where it's like, I'm being so clever. No one would ever clock that I'm doing that. And you're dealing with literal adults. You're dealing with literal adult humans who are like, no, I see it. Like, yes, there are parents who miss things, but like if they miss things, girl, they are not looking, quite frankly. And I do think that is the case for a lot of people. And especially in the case of queer people who live in unsafe circumstances, I'm glad for that because they have opportunities to remain safe until they are able to extract themselves from such situations. But even on that tone of you know, you'd mentioned like she bought him fancy spices, the mum, and like his cooking, like because there are bonding moments in the film with Jamie and Dan. One of those first ones is Jamie's trying to set up the tent, he doesn't know what he's doing. Dan comes over and helps him, and even when Jamie cocks up, you don't have Dan being like fucking little idiot. Dan is like, no, no, that's okay. You go and deal with that. I'm gonna sort this. First of all, fuck yes. Like, a dude who doesn't just get fucking angry at everything all the time and like triggers the queer fear of I'm gonna get my fucking head caved in. Like, thank you. Thank you for taking care of me when I need the male in the place to take care of me. Thank you, first of all. And then,
Couldn't be the men in my life.
no,
Yeah, mine either. Mine
not,
either.
not my family girl. Absolutely not. Christ on a cracker. But then you've got the bit where, you know, Dan's gonna start making burgers, and then Jamie sort of pipes up like, "Oh, what kind of seasons are you gonna use?" And he's like,
Have Have you tried paprika?
"Paprika? No, no, paprika, paprika, no, paprika, paprika, paprika. Oh, oh, I was just gonna make burgers. Oh
What
well,
did he say? Just a little salt and pepper.
Yeah.
And I was like, I feel like most people who know how to cook would do more than that, especially when it comes to burgers. Like, you want there to be some seasoning in a burger.
I don't even think my mom seasons for burgers.
Oh, really?
Yes.
but this also comes to a point, and you know, Dan throughout the film, I think really is meant to represent like a kind of soft masculinity in the sense of he is physically present, he has a depth to his voice, he has a way of being that doesn't come across as domineering. But I also think that regardless, young men typically aren't shown things. Like I've said on the podcast before, when I first moved out of home, I did not know how to do a load of laundry. I did not know how to do things, you know,
Really?
because I was raised by a single mum who had 5 kids. She didn't have time, and I had to learn. I had to figure it out on my own. And I've said before, the way in which I cook delicious food now has come from a love and devotion of cooking food. But most people don't have that. So if you don't know, you're not going to be galvanized to learn. And if no one tells you, then you don't know. So I think that's actually a great example of how subtly, if we don't teach our boys adult things, they don't know how to do such adult things. So Jamie comes in and he has actually brought some of his spices with him. They work together, they make the burgers, they sit down and eat them.
What are you, a food critic?
Yeah, oh yeah, no, exactly. Like the older brother's like, oh, it's fine. And then
Hmm.
Dan actually jumps in, he's like, oh, I didn't know you were a food critic. I didn't know we had a food critic here with us. And because Will obviously thinks to himself, like, oh, I'm gonna act all cool and, you know, impress, because this is the thing, even straight boys want to impress other older boys, right? Like
Hmm.
this isn't just a queer thing of like I have a crush. This is a very male thing. So Will obviously tries to be like, oh well, they're kind of whatever, and then Dan's like, didn't know you were a food critic. Well, no, it wasn't that. No, I did not know we had a food critic sat at the table. I can't wait to read your review of this when it comes out. Which paper is that in again? Which newsletter do you post to?
New York Times.
So, there for me was like a little celebratory moment, like fist pumping the air, because I'm like, that moment where like an older male like sees you as a young gay guy, well, whether or not he sees you as gay, but like, he sees you, the young male, and is like, nah, I'm on your side on this one. I think you're the cool guy. I think you and I are gonna banter for a moment. You feel so fucking good. Like, it is just like, I remember when those moments happened for me in high school, like, I felt elated for weeks. Like, you couldn't tell me that I wasn't king shit because, like, the cool guy fucking saw me and he was on my side of the conversation, you know?
Well, and they have that touching conversation afterwards about like Dan confesses that he is the youngest child of his family and that he has older brothers that tormented him as he was growing up. So like he knows firsthand what it's like to be on the outside or to be made fun of for like being good at literally anything. Like if you I don't understand that this thing that happens among children, like I think this is mostly post-puberty, but this idea of like, oh, he's good at something, we need to make fun of him for it because it's not something like football or athletic prowess or swag or something like that. Like anything else that you're good at, they're going to immediately mock because I don't know, is it jealousy or is it just to take attention off themselves?
So there are only scant weight-related comments in the film. There is a moment where Will, the older brother, mentions he's got a nickname for his younger brother, and it's Nips, which I think we were talking before. Sam, you'd mentioned that's in relation to the fact that he's got moobs. But the other one is when they're going to play a game of charades, or taboo, as they say in the film. Jamie suggests that he and Dan pair up against Will and Allie. And Dan's response is like, all right, big boys. Like, it's a positive affirmation. Like, how did it feel to you kind of comparing those two moments?
I think it's nice to see. It's almost like big boy solidarity. It's like, yeah, we're team big boys.
Yeah, that's how I took it as well. I thought it was like Dan wasn't denying that he himself was a bigger man. And it wasn't being framed in the way of like, oh yeah, the big boy. Yeah, well, how am I going to put this? It's not like the tone of his voice was positive, the connotation was positive. It wasn't like, oh yeah, big boys because we're probably going to lose. No, it was like, hell yeah, big boys, we're going to fucking take you two on and we're going to win.
Yeah, that celebratory element of size, which again feels like it is lacking in so much fat media, let alone gainer media, that was actually really refreshing to see that moment. Um, there are other moments in the film that are, I would say, you could assume size adjacent. Like the brother mentions, oh, he's not interested in basketball, he's interested in the barefoot Contessa. And obviously, Jamie's brought his spices. We talked about it. There's a scene where they cook, it's really, really nice. But there's no framing, I think, of it being about his weight or size. And I wonder if for either of you, like, do you feel like that stands out? Where it's like, oh, you would typically expect, oh, he likes cooking because he's fat, versus it felt more throwaway when the brother mentioned it more than anything else. What did you guys think?
I mean, to me, it felt like sort of he could have put it, oh, he doesn't like basketball, he likes anime, or he doesn't like basketball, he likes art house films. It's basically like saying he's more of an artist than an athlete, instead of he's fat and therefore that he's all about food. You know, as someone who was an art kid myself.
I think it was definitely not a dig at his size, but uh, at his flamboyancy, perhaps, because Ina Garten is kind of a gay icon.
Oh, is she? Okay. Didn't
Yeah,
know.
a little bit,
Yes.
a little bit.
There you go. Again, see, even references I'm not going to pick up, it feels like in so many ways there are layers to the character that are specific to a time and a place. But I think that's a beautiful thing. But no, as I say, I don't think it was like so specifically about his size. I do think it was a little othering, but I think the fact that you can look at that character and you don't immediately go, oh, it's food because he's fat, I think is a good sign. I think it builds up that Jamie is a very real person, and even from the viewer's perspective, it's probably helping to delineate expectations of, well, he's a fat kid, where is this going to go? You know?
Mhm.
There are other moments as well, like uh, people are making suggestions about things where Jamie is quite hesitant to be like, oh, I don't know. Anytime Dan makes a suggestion, Jamie's like, actually, I agree with Dan. I agree with Dan. Dan, thank you so much for speaking. You're so right. Everything you say is true. I completely agree.
Yeah, when you're a little queer person and you've got a crush on someone and you're just trying to impress that crush, but you're not trying to be too eager because you don't want to come off as oh, what's the word I'm looking for here? You don't want to come off as like
Pushy.
pushy
Pushy,
or
clingy, desperate, all that.
yeah, desperate. You don't want to come off as desperate.
He was definitely a little overeager to me.
So real, so very real.
Yeah. I mean, I can totally relate to that. You know, it's that I don't know how to articulate the feeling. Like I don't know if I can ascribe a particular emotion to it, but it's like you're in the proximity of your crush. You want them so badly to notice you, but you don't want to make it obvious because you don't want anyone else to know.
It's like, God, I hope I'm on their team.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed.
Very, very relatable. Um, Now, we obviously mentioned throughout the film, Jamie is coming to terms with his sexuality. There is a scene where he starts to, I assume for the very first time, picture hooking up with Nan. Now, again, things that I feel very contentious about because we talked about this, Tim. People love to cast 30-year-olds and call them 16-year-olds and have them have sex on screen. People love to get two actual 16-year-olds together and get them to do stuff. And I'm also like, that doesn't feel comfortable. What they do in this is they have Jamie laying on his back, and there's the fantasy scene that appears. And he pictures himself as age appropriate going to meet up with Dan. And I think that's a brilliant way of navigating that conversation without dealing with anything untoward and inappropriate. Also, to that point, when he projects himself as older, the older self is a bear. The older self is still thick. Once again, Jamie is not interested in thinness. He is interested in being himself. And what's really cute, because obviously throughout the film, he'll just wear like shorts and a tee. Like his older bear self, you can kind of tell, like, you know that gay guy who wears like a sort of wraparound sweater kind of a moment?
Yeah, yeah. He in his fantasies, he's a bit more stylish.
A little stylish, maybe a little refined, if you can say that. And even the fantasy itself, like, because obviously it doesn't take place in a house, they're camping in the woods, so there's like the ablution blocks, well, like, there's the door that opens, and like, that moment happens, and there's like, hey, I was hoping you were going to come and see me. And then, like, it doesn't last very long. He sits like old Jamie down in the chair and just like massages his shoulders. And like, the conversation was, oh, so I heard you broke up with Ali. And it's like, yeah, she just wasn't the one for me. And it's like, when you're 14 and you don't have the wherewithal to be like how the sex happens, you just go, and then they massaged and cuddled and kissed, and then they lived happily ever after.
Yeah, it's usually a much more romantic fantasy, but I have to ask, did you just call public bathrooms an ablution block? Is that what you said?
That's what they're called, ablution blocks. Ablution?
I'll t- I'll
That's
take your word
so
for it.
fancy. We just call it the outhouse or the shitter or the public bathroom.
The
No,
shitter, exactly.
no, like, but when you go to a campsite and you've got like that low building, which is both toilet and shower,
Yeah.
we would call those the ablution blocks.
Not over here. We would just say,
Uh,
"Hey, I'm going to the
uh,
bathroom. I'm going to the shitter. I'm going to drain the lizard or drop the kids off at the pool."
allegedly, they're called that.
Alleged.
That's the first time I've ever heard them referred to as
Alleged.
that.
Allegra. What do you call them toilets? Allegra block? I don't know. I don't know about that. But anyways, it was a cute scene and I really liked it. But as I say, he pictures himself as a bear, and I want to ask you, what do you think that means of Jamie's self-perception? Like sexuality that he's navigating aside, the fact that he pictures himself as a bear when he's older, what do you think that means?
It means he's comfortable with himself. That he hasn't been made to totally feel defeated
You
by
felt
the people around him.
Like, I can't remember a point in the film where Jamie seemed to be down on himself about his weight. I mean, Jamie never references his weight, and he also never says anything about his size. He never says, "Oh, but I'm big and fat, therefore I can't do this." And the only like true, I guess, insecurity that I noticed was that when they went swimming, he kept his shirt on.
now. We'll come back to that in a second, but actually, Sam, I wanted to ask you because you grew up chubby, as you said. When you were picturing yourself as an older person in your teen years, did you specifically picture someone of a certain size or shape, or was it not so much?
Yeah, I imagined myself thinner.
I mean, to not to derail from this conversation about this movie, but how has that transition been for you? Obviously, accepting that you're a gainer and coming more onto that journey. Like, did you feel that elements like that kind of had to be unpicked a little bit before you truly felt comfortable in your larger body?
Honestly, I think it just happened with time. I mean, I think I'm really sexy now. I didn't feel like I was sexy then, but I don't know. I must have done something right in my mental headspace to feel confident about myself now that I didn't feel back then.
Hmm. I choose to believe that it's gaining. Gaining, much like Jesus, has healed you of your transgressions, and now you are beautiful and fat. Amen.
The almighty Grommr blessed my soul.
Yes, we don't pray to the Lord, we pray to the Lard, and the Lard has blessed you accordingly. Um,
You know what's interesting is like when I pictured myself older, when I was like a young teenager and I thought about what I would be like when I was in my 20s, I didn't picture myself heavy, because even though I have been into this particular fetish as far back as I can remember, even though I've always had a fascination with fat bellies, all that stuff, I didn't think of myself as being bigger. I just always kind of pictured myself kind of as I am now, snarky, sarcastic, witty. Um, for some reason, I always pictured that I was going to be a smoker, which I don't know why I worked that into my fantasies. It was probably a really stupid thing to do because I've been a smoker for over 20 years and I wish I could stop. But like that's the kind of like I saw myself as being like that cool gay guy that like nothing bothers them, like everything's sort of just easy peasy. Didn't turn out that way, but it's like I certainly evolved into the sarcastic Daria template that I have become.
I also wanted to point out that Jamie's 14. I don't know when he turned 14, but he's likely just starting high school,
mm,
and his perception of himself could change in the future because he has 3 to 4 more years of high school to look forward to.
right, in America, you're split apart. In Australia, it's all one. So from year 8 through to year 12, it's all the same block. So
Mm.
middle school and high school are all together. But to come back to what you said before, Tim, the only real indication of body shame is when you see him swimming, he's swimming with his shirt on. But at the very end of the film, you can see that there has been a change because the last time he goes into the lake, he takes his shirt off and he goes swimming shirtless. So,
And can I say that I appreciate that when they did that, they shot him from the back. I
mm,
actually appreciate that they didn't shoot him from the front. And I don't know why it's kind of like I feel like it's less voyeuristic
yeah.
that they shot him from behind.
Well, because the belly and the moves give you such like a textured, multivariant view of fatness, whereas thinness doesn't. But from behind, he hasn't quite developed any like specific back rolls or anything. It is a bigger back, but it is still a smooth back. And so you see him standing side by side with his brother. His brother is smaller, he is larger, but they are in essence blank slates. And I do think that there is some kind of symbolism in that he is simply going in his body representative of just owning of the self rather than of anything else. And I mean, again, Sam, for you growing up in a larger body, does that resonate with you? The whole removing of the shirt and feeling comfortable being shirtless while swimming?
I used to be that kid, only kid in the pool with a shirt on swimming, and I did not like it. I never liked it, and I didn't like having to I mean, it was uncomfortable, but I didn't want to take the shirt off. So I think now I am definitely much more comfortable.
I would certainly say, and I know we've talked about this on the podcast before, when Tim and I went on the Grommr of the Seas cruise 2022, there was a beautiful moment towards the very end of the cruise where, it's one of the last days you're at sea, you're returning to port. So many people had bought Speedos that we were like, you know what, we'll take over a different pool today. A nice big one where people can actually go swimming because we took over the solarium where it was mostly just kind of bobbing around the water, just kind of sat on a little step, being cute and fat in the little pool area. But this one, essentially, what would happen is every time someone would walk over in their speedos, we would just be like, "Woo!" like whooping and cheering and catcalling and all sorts. And we knew someone who, bless them, prior to the cruise, had lost a little bit of that weight. They were feeling a bit uncomfortable in their body because they weren't looking their biggest or how they wanted to look, and we made it a point to whoop and cheer for that person, and like the smile on his face when he got into the pool was the most incredible thing. Like, we always come back to this point about like the importance of fat community and gainer community, but like it is life changing, y'all. Like, just having people who love and support you on your body journey is life changing. It's a beautiful thing. There is a moment just after the fantasy scene that we were talking about, where he gets up and gets a raw hot dog from the cooler and sniffs it. And it was very funny because I was watching an interview with someone where they talked about that, and they were like, maybe he was trying to like cope with his sexual feelings with hunger. And I was like, no, baby, he was imagining his penis. Like, this is not
Yeah, you wouldn't have gotten a phallic shaped object for any other reason.
for any other reason. And then, the brother comes back and he basically has to curl up with the sausage and go to sleep. So, like it's funny.
I was just gonna ask, what phallic objects did y'all use when you were growing up?
Well, I didn't so much because I'm a top, so I never really considered the idea of getting fucked. Um,
Oh, but
and
imagine this.
I didn't really try to experiment with fellatio either on anything before. So I suppose the most telltale or potentially embarrassing thing that I did was I was an art kid, so like I used to doodle and like cartoons and whatnot. So occasionally I would draw like fat boy cartoons, as a sort of way to like I guess work out what I was dealing with, and then I would feel ashamed for even having drawn them. So
Oh,
rather than do the logical thing and just throw it away, I would like fold it up and do a bunch of like I'd like fold it up and then I'd shove it under my mattress as if that somehow was going to, I don't know, just negate its existence. And I think that my mother came across one of those one time. Fairly certain she found one. Never said anything to me, thank God. But I'm fairly certain that she found a drawing like that once or twice.
I wasn't picturing phallic objects because I was never really interested in genitals, if I'm honest. Like, and this is something I've always considered with regards my sexuality. I know how to engage with cock, I know how to use my own, but when I think about, oh, I would like to do the intimacy with someone, I'm never, ever thinking about dick or hole or anything. I'm always thinking belly. I'm thinking chest. I'm thinking arm fat and leg fat and butts and chubby calves, and round double chins and faces. That's more my speed. And I wonder how many gainers had that experience versus genitalia. So if that's you, feel free to email us at thiccradio@gmail.com and let us know what your experience was.
I can identify with that a little bit, James, because I didn't really think about the actual act of penetration until I did it. And then, after that, it was kind of a wrap. But prior to that, it was, all body related.
I asked that because uh we were Star Wars kids, and so we had
Not the light.
lightsaber. We
Ah,
had lightsabers. What can you do with the end of a lightsaber?
did you shove a lightsaber up your butt?
No, but I thought about it a lot.
Oh, actually, no. Do you know what? I did do? What do you call those like fucking little It's like, oh, I don't even know how to describe it. It's a plastic tube filled with like some kind of viscous fluid.
Liquid,
Oh,
liquid with
water
the
weenies.
with the hole in the
Yeah,
middle.
water
Yeah, yeah, and
weenies.
like they would slip through your
Exactly.
hands. I
Yes.
absolutely fucked one of those one time. I
I
absolutely,
abs I absolutely did too.
Yeah, they were like early fleshlights.
yeah, it was absolutely that. So I absolutely did do that. But I need to talk about the moment. This spooked me, this gagged me. I was immediately aroused when this happened, and this is how I knew that the filmmaker was either a bear or a chaser in this moment. Because the very next day, they're all getting up and doing their things. People are hungover. Jamie's sitting in the chair. Dan gets up. He's wearing his jumper because that's what he slept in. And he sits down in the chair and he takes the jumper off and he's trying to leave the shirt on. And you get the peekaboo belly. You get the belly shot. The camera shot zooms in on the belly and Jamie's eyes flash wildly. And it's like, this is how I know that this
Yeah.
is there. This is how I know that it was a chaser moment in this because.
That was the most relatable moment for me. Was that
Fine.
whole like a guy that you have a crush on, or a chubby guy is like taking his shirt off and you get that little peek of belly and like your eyes are glued to it and you're trying not to make it obvious, but you are fucking staring. And
Oh.
anybody who could be watching you at that moment is going to see that you're staring directly at their belly.
But yeah, it wasn't like because I don't know. Do people who like skinny people do they like stare at abs? Because I don't know that they do.
They
They
do.
do. They
Do
do.
they?
They do.
I
Yeah.
don't know.
Because I mean, all the friends that I've had over the years that were girls, that was usually the one thing that they were the most interested in. It was like, oh, look at those abs. I could grate cheese off those abs.
Mm.
When that scene came up, I rewound 30
Took a photo.
seconds
Did you take a
and
photo?
no, I got my phone out and I recorded it and I sent
Because I took a photo. I was like, this man's stomach is so gorgeous. Oh my God.
I'm fireworks going off in my head.
Oh, girl. Oh God, he was so beautiful. Oh my goodness. Um, right. Now, soon after this, Dan is chilling in a hammock. Jamie has an idea on how he can try and like further the conversations with Dan and get to know him a bit better. He sketches a picture of him, and it's actually a really, really good picture, right? And obviously he's showing it to Dan, and Dan's like, "Oh, that's really cool, man. Thanks so much." Dan is nonplussed because why would he be otherwise? And Jamie's sense of projection is so palpable. The way he walks off and he's so sad, and the way he just like folds it up sadly and like puts it in the bin. I
Yeah.
was just like, oh God. So I'm asking the two of you, did y'all ever do anything for a boy and then it was either not acknowledged or it was rejected and you just wanted to die?
I will never know the answer to this question because before I left high school, I did write a letter to a boy that I had had a crush on through all of high school. And this was a guy that would not have given a flying fuck about me, probably would have punched my face in, but I just had to get it all out. And I slipped it in his locker, and I don't know what ever happened with that. And frankly, I don't know if I want to know. It's like I don't know if I want an answer to that question. I think that was a bit of closure for me. So I don't know what he ever thought about it. I've never tried to look him up. I don't want to. I'm just gonna leave that alone.
Unfortunately, I have to say yes. I just recently did this. I can't believe I'm talking about this. I left someone a birthday card because I saw them and that week was their birthday. And that took a lot of courage. And I didn't even give it to him. I like set it on a table where he would see it. And then he messaged me later and said, "Thank you for the note."
Well, at least you got some acknowledgement.
When I was at university, because my high school years I was doing the born again Christian thing, so I was never like trying to look at boys and do all that. But the very first guy I had a crush on, he was deep into horror. And as Tim knows, I am not into horror in any way, shape, or form. But you want to know what I did? Is I read a book series, a horror book series, because it was his favorite book series called the Demonata books. I think it's by Darren Shan or Darren Shan or something like that.
Hmm, not familiar.
They were grotesque and horrible, and I read them cover to cover just so I had something to talk with him about, and he didn't care one bit.
Oh,
So, I went through dumb fuckery for no good goddamn reason. But I think, again, that is a very common queer male experience. So, there is another bit that comes up. So, at one point, after being cagey about girls, Will asks Jamie if he's gay, and if so, to tell him so that he doesn't have to stay in the same tent as him. Will obviously represents a lot of contention that you experience as a queer kid in a straight family, because straight kids are often little fucking cunts when it comes to being a fag. So, that felt very palpable again. Um, but also afterwards, right? Because like they go out and they see these two teen girls because Will's trying to convince him to get drunk, yada yada yada, and like Jamie gets out of it somehow, and like it's all fine. And then like the next day, there's that arm wrestling scene we were talking about, and then like Jamie joins in. Dan lets him win, obviously. But it's just trying to be a nice thing. It's trying to be a confidence booster. And Jamie's chuffed. And then Will pipes up with like, oh, I guess you are a loser because you couldn't even go all the way with that girl from last night. It starts like bringing things up to deliberately like tear him down. And this all eventually leads to a physical altercation with a punch, which was, again, very, very real. Did either of y'all have contention with your siblings like that growing up, where it came to fisticuffs?
All the time. Just over the most random, stupid shit, but never over like anything like this situation.
I didn't, because I have two younger sisters. So, I mean, and actually neither of them ever if they made fun of me, it was usually for just being gloomy. It was for being goth. It was for being, like, oh, you're so weird. You're into so much weird stuff. But it was never about being gay. I don't think either one of them had any concept of, because when I was 14, knew I was gay. My middle sister would have only been like 11, and then the youngest one would have been 4. So, and by the time I was totally out and living as an out gay man, they were still young. So they have had plenty of time to adjust to the fact that they have a gay brother. And now both of them are very quick to jump to my defense over anything that is anti LGBTQ or anything that's homophobic.
Absolutely. Same
Which,
with my siblings.
which I hope is a promise for young people, if we ever happen to have young people listening to this. Like, dynamics in families do change over time, and sometimes people require the advent of time to get over their bullshit and improve. So, if that is you currently in a situation, please hold fast to the potential of people's betterment. Um, there was another moment that gagged me. He makes a list about his qualities because he's obviously trying to contemplate, like, am I gay or not? And it's like, I like music, but I don't know that I like musical theatre. I don't like sport, but also I like plaid. It was just like, when you are trying to marry yourself up to this idea of what a homosexual is, and it is not a one-to-one, and you're just like, I don't understand. What am I? Did you all ever experience this? Because I sure fucking did.
Yep. Yep. That list, the gay panic list, which is like, okay, let's see. Love Wizard of Oz. Hate football. Love Madonna. It's like I made a similar list and I was like, yep, I think this means I'm a homo.
I never really weighed the pros and cons on that, but I could imagine doing that.
Yeah, it was, for me, a very simple list when I was in Bible college, trying to become a pastor, going, why can't I stop thinking about these dumb, ugly boys and their dumb, ugly bodies and their dumb, ugly butts and bellies? Crap.
Yeah. Yeah,
I'm
that's
so
probably the
sorry.
biggest indication. Like, am I lusting? Am I actually experiencing lust for another boy? Then yeah, that's a pretty good indication.
There is a moment near the end of the film where they go on a hike and it's just the two of them together, and they're trying to find their way back, and Dan starts to get panicky. And it's actually Jamie who calms him down because Jamie was prepared and Jamie brought like protein bars. He's like, listen, it just sounds to me like you're a bit dehydrated or a bit hungry. Like, I think you should eat something and that will help you. And you cut to them like chilling, and he's eating a little protein bar and he's happy again. And I think I was talking about this with you, Sam. Like, what a brilliant way of flipping masculinity on its head. Dan, who is this very typical masculine guy that you expect to be in charge, be a leader, all of this, the moment he comes across a real world situation, falls apart. And it is Jamie, the person who's questioning his sexuality, but is actually over prepared for the world and probably going to do quite well in life, who thought ahead to bring food and also learned enough about like the nature of camping to be like, I think you're dehydrated. I think you are malnourished. You need to eat something and that will help you. Like, so many moments in this film that I think really twist and pivot audience expectations of like how this is going to go and how certain tropes are going to be represented. Did either of you ever find yourselves in situations where, despite being treated on the outer as the queer person, that you were the person who kind of came in and saved the day? Did you have a moment like that?
I think often in media, like the first one to kind of go crazy is the fat guy. So I think in that way, it was really refreshing that he was aware, really, of what was happening.
One of the last bits of the film that I think we need to talk about is actually the ending, because they're all wrapping up saying goodbye. Jamie's about to head inside, and then actually he comes back out and says to Ali, hey, do you mind if I talk to Dan alone for a minute? He gets in the car. And they want to talk about this moment because during that bit where they get lost in the woods and they're coming back, Jamie trips and scrapes his leg. And there's nothing to tourniquet it with, so Dan takes off his entire shirt to fix it. And you don't see it on film, but you see both Dan look and then Jamie looks down, and you can see Jamie shy away, and what that is clearly referencing is an erection. And obviously it's an awkward moment that they don't know what to say about. So when Jamie gets in the car, he's addressing it like, I wanted to talk about that and apologize if it made you uncomfortable. Dan says, it's okay, bud. When I was your age, these things happened for no apparent reason all the time. And then Jamie says, yeah, I don't think it happened for no apparent reason. And Dan goes, okay. And then Jamie says he thinks he's handsome. And Dan says, that's cool. And then joked and said, I think I'm a little old for you. To which Jamie then laughed and said, I agree. Jamie then asks Dan, are you mad at me? And Dan says, no, I'm not. Jamie thanks him for listening, and Dan commends him for telling him and says, it is not an easy thing to do. And they say they'll see each other when they see each other. Jamie gets out of the car and goes. And I want to ask you both, how did that scene in particular make you feel?
I immediately burst into tears. It was so sweet.
I just found myself thinking, God, he's so brave. I didn't have the courage to tell a crush that I had a crush on them at the time. I mean, and we are talking about it would have been like 1997, 1998, when I would have been in a similar situation.
Yeah.
And, you know, it wasn't exactly the safest time to come out about those things. It's not like it certainly wasn't the 50s or 60s or anything like that. But the only queer people that were in the media at the time were Ellen and Melissa Etheridge and Elton John. That was it. Like, you know, we didn't exactly have we didn't have mentors to look up to, you know, and I didn't have the bravery to come out to a crush at the time. So like, I just found the whole scene commendable. I was like, God, I wish I had that kid's confidence at that age. But I'll tell you, the scene where he tried to hide the fact that he was having an erection, like that hit so close to home. Like that was, like I said, back in those gym locker rooms of just like forcing you're just like, don't react, don't fucking react. If you fucking react, they're gonna kill me, you know, that kind of thing.
I mean, I cried when I watched it just because I was like, this is how men need to handle same-sex rejection. This is how they need to address same-sex rejection. There is no need for cruelty or unkindness. Like, depending on how Dan handled that situation, that could have set Jamie up for the next lifetime of how he sees himself, on how he handles himself. So much of this film ends up being Dan being this beautiful mentor to Jamie and this potential of Jamie's future. Like, Jamie lives as this chubby 14-year-old who doesn't have any boys, as we see in the film, really speaking to him and giving him kindness. Dan does that. And Dan does it in a way where he is a big guy that does not shy away from his size. He does not pretend to shrink himself. And I think in many ways shows Jamie the potential that you don't have to wait until you're in your potential late 30s, early 40s, like the men next door, to be in a queer relationship. Dan is a much more accessible age. Dan is happy in his body. Dan is doing just fine. You can also be doing just fine. So I think that was a beautiful message. And since Jamie came out to Dan, and that was the first person he ever came out to, I want to ask you all, who was the first person that each of you came out to?
I came out to my mom over text. I wasn't brave enough to do it in person. And then she told everybody else. So I'm grateful to her. She's my biggest supporter.
I came out to my parents at the same time. Funnily enough, while we were watching Ellen, because she had just come out, and I think that I asked them one of those like leading hypothetical questions, like, "Oh, how would you feel if I was gay?" And of course, they could read directly into that. And my mom was like, "Well, do you have something to tell us?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm gay. I'm 100% positive that I'm gay." And that was the whole moment where she, at first was like shocked by it. I feel like she cried, but I can't quite remember if she did. My dad took it in a very stoic way. He gave me a hug and he was like, "You're my son and I love you and nothing that you do could ever change that." So like it was overall a positive experience.
And I never actually came out to a majority of my family after that. When I got my first boyfriend, I just posted a picture of the two of us on Facebook and let the comments roll in.
When I first came out, so like I said, I was in the middle of Bible college at the time. And I had my unit of friends that at the time, we were all still talking from high school. And I remember expressing to them that I was struggling with my sexuality because I was deep in faith. And I remember this one night we were all at this like local park having a couple drinks, chilling. And they were just like, "We will always love you no matter who you are. But if their love for you is conditional, then doesn't really sound like some kind of God with an eternal love situation." And that was the moment for me where I'd been struggling and trying to accept it within myself, and I just kind of realized I am faced with people who like me just as I am. How wonderful. I remember screaming that I'm gay, and they all cheered and they all gave me a great big hug. And then, like 2 days later, I put it up on Facebook that I was gay, and I got horrible abuse from so many people that I knew from the church community. I had several cousins threatening to go around and knock people's teeth out at their homes because Perth is a small place and people know people. So that was very entertaining. So, what would you all give this film out of 10?
I give it a 10. I give it a 10 out of 10. I think that it was so relatable. And I wish that I had had a film like this when I was his age, because the films that I had were, queer people were either dying of a disease or being left heartbroken at the end of the film, or worse than that, they were the villain.
I initially I think I gave it an 8 out of 10, but I think I've come around. It's a 10 out of 10.
To me, this is definitely a 10. I mean, it's just sweet. And one of the typical questions we ask is like, what do we like about it? And I think we liked a lot about this film. And then we'd like to ask, what do we find challenging? And I genuinely don't know if I found anything challenging about this film. I think everything from the way it was shot to the length to the dialogue to the performance, like everything truly felt like a slice of life. I am watching a real situation unfold. That element made me feel invested in the story. I honestly, no notes. What about you
I
all?
think it was handled very well, and I think it was handled very carefully, because the potential for something like this to go off the rails and have some negative representation it's high, like, or how should I put this? The bar is low. The bar is low for this kind of thing going off the rails. So I was happy to see that this was something that took its time and was very careful about the subject.
It would have been so easy for it to just become something terrible.
Well, listen, I think this is a great place to end the film. What a fantastic film. And honestly, y'all, I'm going to recommend you check it out. I know that it's streaming in places. I know that it's being picked up by different companies because people want to watch it. It's generating a lot of buzz.
I think it's winning a lot of awards at independent film festivals at the moment.
Yeah.
It just received a DVD release.
Oh, did it? Okay.
Yes, it's available on Amazon and Walmart.com.
There you go. So you'll go and check it out. Big Boys 2023, available online for purchase. We strongly recommend it. And Sam, thank you so much for being here today. This was a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
It was wonderful. Now, where can our listeners find you online?
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at honey_mustard98 and on Grommr at honey_mustard.
Wonderful. Well, that's a wrap for now here on Thicc Radio. Please remember to like and subscribe, rate us 5 stars, and leave us a good review. If you liked this episode, the podcast, or just us in general, please share it with your friends and encourage them to tune in. You can find me on Instagram and BlueSky at stannnum.
And you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok at ThiccyMouse. You can also look us up on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at Thicc Radio, or at our website at podpage.com/thiccradio. If you want to submit a voice note or become a financial supporter of the show, you can find the links in the show notes, and you can always write to us at thiccradio@gmail.com. So until next time, bye, Fats.
Bye, Fats.
Bye, Fats.
Let's talk about it.
Thicc Radio is a Patreon and Enter app podcast produced by Stan and Thiccy Mouse.
Mixed and mastered by stannnum.
Our artwork is provided by Lokitu.
Our theme song is provided by Spotify.